All right. So Leader Hangout has commenced. Thanks, guys, for making time to be here. We've got a full group. I thought one of the purposes of this is to connect with each other, encourage one another. So we obviously can't have everybody share in the time we got. So I thought Bo and Mike could just give us a couple of 2-minute updates on what's going on at their sites, and we could all listen in on that. Maybe Bo, you could unmute your mic and just tell us how it's going there in Tacoma.
Thank you, Mike. It's been good. It's been a good fall for us. Good start to the academic year, and I think the big things that we're seeing that's really exciting for us. Our Sunday numbers are definitely up, but our community group numbers are up as well. We've added about 33 people into community groups since September, and so that's a big deal for us, being a church of community groups. So we're really excited about that. And I think that presents leadership challenges of making sure our community group leaders are apprenticing and releasing people to lead new groups and to branch off. So our biggest challenge right now is to continue that momentum. Historically we've run about 85 to 95% of our Sunday attendance in community groups, and right now the challenge that's kind of dropped down a little bit. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing in the sense that we're growing quick on a Sunday, a lot quicker than we ever have. And the need now is to get them plugged into community groups, into intentional discipleship environments. And so it's an exciting time for us. It's been really good. I think we're wanting to see some people take that step of faith. We have unbelievers connecting to community groups, which is exciting, but wanting to challenge them to take that step of faith. And so coming up, we've got some baptisms scheduled out. We didn't have anybody that we knew of that wanted to be baptized, but we went ahead and scheduled a baptism date, and we've fished 2 out of the pond so far. So we're looking to see a few more come through there. And yeah, it's been good. It's been exciting, but it presents new challenges for sure.
That's great. Thanks, Bo. That's good to hear. Mike, what about in St. Joe? Can you give us an update about what's going on there so we can be praying for you and celebrating with you?
Yeah, we've had a pretty interesting kind of last 5 weeks or so. We've had a good year. 5 weeks ago, we decided that we were going to. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Hey, 5 weeks ago, we decided we were going to preach on homosexuality, so we did a big sermon on that, and I thought, man, this is going to be really challenging. It went really well, and then the last 4 weeks, we decided we were going to preach a series on money, which is actually quite a bit harder to do, and we just had a lot of people get set free from really materialism. I heard tons of great personal testimonies, and God really kind of rocked our church just with kind of, I think, giving us gifts of generosity and setting people free from kind of just idolatry with money. And so that was great. And at the end of that, we averaged, so last year we averaged 138 in 2013, and this year we were averaging about 194. And the last sermon of our money series, we had 231 come, so that was really encouraging. And then we followed that up this last Sunday, a few days ago, we had Baptism Sunday. Bo, to give you an encouragement, we set this up like maybe 8 weeks ago, and we didn't have anybody that we knew of wanting to be baptized, and we had 16 sign up, and then we ended up baptizing 18 people on Sunday. It was just a great opportunity. I mean, it felt pretty powerful. I think it was probably one of the best opportunities we've ever had to share the gospel with a lot of unchurched and a lot of non-Christians. So I preached short, like actually short, 15 minutes, just a real pure gospel message, and I had 2 people share testimonies, and just about how God, one of them, a gal from Maryville who got saved about 4 years ago there while I was there, got baptized, now lives here, is now married, has a baby on the way. Great story of redemption. Another guy who a year and a half ago was agnostic, incredibly worldly, an alcoholic, battling depression, anxiety, all kinds of messed up issues. God radically saved him when he ended up in jail. Just encountered him with his spirit. The guy did not believe Scripture. He read the New Testament, yesterday as he's sharing his, or on Sunday when he shared his testimony, he talked about how God had just taken care of all of his misconceptions of Scripture while he was in jail and reading the Bible, and he talks about how he felt this weird presence, and as he just accepted it, just the floodgates opened, and Jesus just started speaking to him. So it was amazing, because this guy a year and a half ago would not have been able to share, and yesterday he shared boldly. He gets up to share. You know, you never know when people get up to share testimonies, and he just looks at me and he goes, "Hey, I just want to say thanks to Mike for giving me this opportunity." He just, I mean, the guy had some, you know, just confidence, and it was his boldness when he was up on stage. He articulated the gospel really well. And yesterday I'm talking to him, and he's talking to me about being up on stage, and he was kind of explaining that, saying I felt fearless and just really bold. And so then I'm starting to talk to him about being baptized in the Spirit, and man, it's just God has set that guy free, and it's just been really, really great discipleship. So that's kind of where we're at. Like I said, we averaged about 194 this year. We had 272 on this last Sunday, where we preached I mean, it was just a gospel-centered Sunday, tons of testimonies, and so we're really encouraged, but not sure where to go from here. So there's that.
That's awesome, Mike. So you said how many people were there on Sunday? Oh, sorry, you muted yourself.
Yeah, 272 this Sunday.
And you baptized 18. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it looks like you're in the glory cloud right now. So.
That's called a foggy PC camera.
There you go. Shekinah glory. That's great, guys. That's good to hear. We'll get ready to turn it over to Donnie here in a second. Looks like we got a few people that are watching with us live, and just to let you know, when we're in the Q&A time, if you got questions, you can tweet them with the hashtag #LeaderHangout, and we can try to get those in as well. So with that, we'll turn it over to Donnie Griggs. Donnie leads a church in North Carolina that's thriving, and he'll be speaking this year at Mobilize, which is the beginning of January, our Newfrontiers conference for young people. So thought it would be a great way to get Donnie connected with us and encourage us. So Donnie, thanks a lot for being with us, and take it away, and then we'll, when you're ready, just let us know. We can start doing some Q&A.
Awesome, man. Thank you guys so much. I actually have a long-standing affinity for Newfrontiers as a tribe and a team of churches. I have a great friendship with Brian and Rachel there in St. Louis, and good friends with a lot of the guys in some of the other parts of the world. I spoke at West Point this year, which is an event in Exeter in the UK. It was a Newfrontiers event. So I did some stuff there. I've done stuff at CCK Brighton with Joel and those guys, and stuff with PJ and the guys down in South Africa, Steve Von Ryan. If you guys know Steve, I'm going to be with him this coming March. So anyway, the point is, I really have a love for your team of churches, and feel at times that I'm like oddly part of Newfrontiers, but not part of Newfrontiers. I just sincerely love it, and love what you guys are doing, and hope that this can be helpful. So I'd love to just kind of probably talk a little short and just give a lot of time to Q&A. I'll tell you, I did an article. Brian, where would that magazine have gone? That article I did a couple years ago. Would that have been something that kind of went? Remember that? It
was called The Link.
Did that get around? Was that like kind of a new?
All the churches would have gotten it.
Okay, so I mean, you may have seen that. I don't want to rehearse all of that in case you did see it. The subject of contextualization has become really important to me, and it's only because I want to see people get saved, and I know that you, as churches, you're the same. You want to see people get saved, and I think a lot of times we get this subject wrong. I think sometimes what happens is we make contextualization gone bad. Can be liberalism. Can be all kinds of things at the expense of the gospel. And that's not at all what I'm advocating. I think what's becoming to me a real clarifying verse for this subject is Paul in 2 Corinthians 4. And this has just been such a brilliant passage for me lately, just considering What is it that we're doing when we consider, contextualization? What is the point of all this? And Paul says this in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 1. He says, therefore, having this ministry by the mercy of God, we do not lose heart, but we have renounced disgraceful, underhanded ways. We refuse to practice cunning or to tamper with God's word, but by the open statement of the truth, we would commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. And if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled only to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of God, who is the image of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus as Lord. We ourselves as your servants for his sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone into our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus. And so what I love here is that what Paul's saying is that he is he wants his ministry to be one thing and one thing only, putting forth the gospel plainly. And so he carries on in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and says this in verse 3. This is just so awesome. He says, we put no obstacle in anyone's way so that no fault may be found with our ministry, but as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way. And so I think for me, contextualization is really just recognizing, what it should look like for us as church planners and pastors is that we recognize we've been given this ministry by the grace of God. Our job is to put forth the gospel plainly, put forth the truth plainly. And the real work of doing that ongoingly, not just a sermon here and a sermon there, the work of doing that ongoingly is to do the work of what he's talking about in 2 Corinthians 6, where we're removing obstacles from people's way. And so to kind of paint the picture, what I strive for and what we work towards here at One Harbor is we know the gospel is offensive. It's incredibly offensive. I mean, with postmodernity and all the rest, to say that what we believe as far as God's Son was born of a virgin, and he lived a sinless life. He died a sacrificial death. His death, his blood atones for our sin. We were sinners, and we needed his blood. We needed his death, but he rose again, and he's coming back, and he's given us new life now, and give us new life for eternity, and he's going to reign. I mean, all that stuff is craziness to people who don't believe the gospel and don't know Jesus. And so I guess for us, we've kind of said, okay, that's the offense. Jesus is the rock of offense. That's the offense, and we want to work hard to make sure that we don't let anything else become offensive unnecessarily. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at with the 2 Corinthians 6 verses, is making sure that we're not adding obstacles, we're not putting additional stumbling blocks. I think the way we do church a lot of times does that. I think a lot of times what we do when we do church, quote unquote, is we put a lot of unnecessary stumbling blocks in people's way. And it seems to me that Paul was clearing, he was, as a picture, a road and big rocks, and the destination is for someone, people to get to the end where they hear the gospel. And then if they're offended by the gospel, Paul would be the first to say, well, the God of this age has blinded the minds, and to some it's the aroma of life, to some the fragrance of death. I mean, he's acknowledging that he can't make everyone understand the gospel, that it's offensive, that Jesus is the rock of offense. But as I see it, it's like a road with these these rocks that are unnecessary, possible points for people to trip. Where if we did real work of contextualization and worked hard to do ministry in a way that took away unnecessary offenses, when we're doing it right, the only thing that people can get offended by, should get offended by, is Jesus and the gospel. That's my goal at our church, and we're not doing that perfect, but my goal is that in everything we do, that if people say, I just can't be part of this church, I can't stand this church, I can't believe that it would be because of the gospel, that would be the reason that they either stay or leave. And that's idealism. I know that I'm young, I get to be idealistic, but I just honestly think that that should be something that drives us, as we do ministry. And I think a lot of this goes with just the conviction that I have that we all know that Jesus is building his church. and hopefully that translates to Jesus is building the church that we're leading. That's Jesus's church, which is encouraging. Which means, if you're infatuated with, another leader or some preacher or some church planner, it's encouraging to know that Jesus wanted you in your town. He didn't want that guy in your town. He wanted you there. He had you in mind. He had that town in mind. He put you there. He's building his church, and this is kind of a sort of a fundamental thing that drives me is Luke 19:10, where Jesus said that he came to seek and save the lost. And so I just wholeheartedly believe that Jesus building his church is Jesus saving lost people. And I think that, as we think about challenges in ministry, I think, how many people are getting saved, how many lost people, unchurched people, how are we doing in that area should be one of the things that even provides a filter for what are our challenges in ministry. I mean, it just, when you begin to say, okay, Jesus is building his church, what is Jesus' mission? Seeking and saving lost people. Okay, so if that becomes the filter, Jesus is building his church, that's his mission, that's what he's doing, how are we doing in that area? Those begin to be the things that you think about and drive you. It brings you into conflict with, stuff like unnecessary, sentiment. I mean, getting sentimental about, everybody does this. We get sentimental about just dumb stuff. I helped design the logo for our church, because when you plant a church, you are the church receptionist and graphic designer and janitor and all the rest. And several years later, a really gifted guy came on the staff here, and he was a guy who did graphic design stuff for like Nike. And he came in one day to the elders meeting. He wasn't an elder, and he presented to us, he'd basically gone and showed all the different logos that we'd ever had as a church, under my leadership. He didn't know that I had designed all of them, and there was like 10 different kinds. And he basically just went on to say like how dumb this was and why we're gonna do this new logo and why we should do it, blah blah blah. And everyone was like, this is great, and I was upset, and I couldn't figure out why I was so angry. And I was angry because it was my logo, like I came up with that, and I had some cheesy reason why it was a good logo, and at the end of the day, it was just stupid sentiment. And so, I mean, that's a silly example, but I think it's just easy to get sentimental about all kinds of stuff. And so, traveling and visiting churches, you see that guys have gotten sentimental about a certain song, for example. And when that song gets played, there's this demographic of people that just instantly begin to weep, because they remember the days when that song was first played. And but it doesn't, it may not be the best song for lots of reasons for right now. I mean, that's a silly example, but it's one of the things. Or, philosophy of ministry is something that we get sentimental about. That's getting a little more serious. I got a lot of questions when I was at West Point about. We did a Q&A time that, it was interesting. A lot of the questions were around, the sort of the Sunday meeting. How long do we as a church do we do singing? How long do we do the singing portion of worship? And I'm not trying to be prescriptive, in defining what anybody should do. So I don't want to tell you how many minutes we do it, but I was just trying to help people think. For me, I'm expecting a lot of lost people, unsaved people, to come on a weekly basis. We do ministry, the community groups, all the stuff we do it in such a way that we hopefully are engaging a lot of people who are very, at least, curious about Jesus. And so I'm always thinking to myself, how long can they stand up and sing songs that they don't know to a guy they don't know, while we do this? I mean, how long can that really go on? And I'm not trying to stir the pot unnecessarily. I'm just trying to say those are things that it's helpful to think about. What are we doing and why are we doing it? And I just think. I think myself, and I think a lot of us, we get sentimental about the wrong stuff rather than saying, man, is this leading to Jesus saving lost people, or is this leading to the people who Jesus has already saved, just being encouraged and having a good time. So anyway, I think I think for me it's been One Harbor's been a journey of just learning not to assume that I understand the culture, but getting out and engaging it. And so I am all the time without apology with people in the church, and I have just found that I'll give you an example. There was a guy who I came from a church in California, and in California, when you want to meet with people, you have coffee with them. That's what you do. You probably do that in some of your locations as well. But where I was at, if you want to have a meeting, you meet at a cool coffee shop. And so there was a guy here who I knew he needed Jesus, and we had a relationship. And I was like, man, I'm going to lead this guy to the Lord. And so I met with him weekly at a coffee shop for 6 months. And this guy was like Fort Knox, man. I couldn't get one thing out of him. And then one day he invited me to go duck hunting, which I didn't grow up doing, but I've since taken up, because of actually moments like this. So he asked me to go duck hunting with him. So I was like, okay, sure, So I don't have anything. Some guy that somebody else knew had died, and the guy was big like me, and I got all this dead guy's duck hunting clothes and whatever. So I didn't really look the part, but I went along. And we got the decoys set up, and we sat down in the blind, and the sun hadn't even come up yet. And the guy who I'd had coffee with for 6 months, who had never said anything to me, turned and looked at me and said, he said, "Why did God let my daughter die?" And I was like, well, all right. So that's what we're really here for, And just little things like that have taught me that you've got to get out where people are, and you've got to engage culture. And I find that when I do that, when I get with people where they love to be, their walls come down, and I get opportunities. I think when I look, I think I do see Jesus doing that. I think that's him getting on the boat, like with his disciples. He didn't say, "Hey guys, I know you're fishing right now. Meet me at the synagogue later, and we'll talk about something really important." He just seems to just jump right in, and I'm finding real fruitfulness with that. And then the more I do that stuff and sort of bring it into the way we do ministry, the more I find that we're engaging people who would otherwise see church as irrelevant. So I guess for me, I'm just passionate about. I want to learn from other guys. I want to learn what other churches are doing, and I'm happy for conferences and all that stuff. But you can't copy paste stuff. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, Brian's doing it in St. Louis. It must work in Idaho." You've got to, or vice versa. We've got to kind of resist that copy paste thing and really work to reformat. And with the whole goal of saying, "Man, Jesus, you're building your church, and this ministry." What Paul is able to say is that no one's going to be able to find any fault with our ministry, because we're going to preach the gospel and we're going to remove obstacles. And the only thing people can get offended by is going to be Jesus. And that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like to do this ministry. So anyway, I think for me, stuff I'd be considering if I were you guys is how much of what you do in your ministry actually, how much of it are you doing in light of, man, this makes sense to bring the gospel to our culture, versus this made sense at the church I was at before, and the church they were at before, and the church they were at before. And there are some things that we have to do because the Bible says do them. Like, I'm not saying, oh yeah, in my culture it's not really culturally sensitive to preach the gospel. I mean, that's not culture sensitive anywhere. What I mean is, kind of thinking through the ways you do things and how and the things that you do. Even the amount of meetings you do during the week, I don't know how you do that, but I mean, what thought process has gone into, this makes sense because this leads to Jesus seeking and saving lost people in our context right now, not 20 years ago and not in another city or another country, but right now, right here. So anyway, that's kind of just to get the ball rolling. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or questions, but yeah.
Great. Thanks, Donnie. Good job preaching to your computer. It's probably not easy to do.
That was weird.
Yeah, so we'll go into some Q&A. It looks like we got some people watching with us live. So if you have any questions, you can tweet them in with the hashtag #LeaderHangout. We'll try to get those in. But I thought I'll start so I can give people some time to be thinking of amazing questions. I just wanted to know if you've learned any strategies for studying your culture where you're at? I'm sure, I don't know if you've lived where you're at your whole life or if you've moved around, but what have you done to learn the culture you're at and also lead your church into studying the culture?
So I grew up here, and then I moved away for 10 years, and when I came back, I had to basically relearn culture. So that helped and hurt. But as far as what I'm doing to learn culture, I don't spend a lot of time in the church office, and we've just had to build that in where people see that as that's okay. So I'm trying to do prep, offsite at coffee shops or somewhere where I can be around people. It even helps me to imagine. I did this a lot early on. I'd go to a coffee shop or somewhere, whatever I could find, and I would do sermon prep while I just looked around the room, and just imagined, what if I was preaching this message to these people? How would I make it make sense? And just help change the game a little bit, so I wasn't thinking about, oh, here's a 3-point sermon I'm going to give to people who are already Christians who I know, blah, blah, blah. But if I had the opportunity, if my neighbors showed up, what would I say, And so I get out, a lot and try to participate in moments where the community gets together and celebrates. I want to be at those things. I want to see what they're celebrating. I want to see, I also, there were hobbies and stuff I did when I was in California that don't translate here, and rather than being the weird California guy here, I just decided to be the North Carolina guy in North Carolina. So grew a big beard and started hunting, and I mean I didn't own any camouflage growing up. I grew up surfing, and since then I've started hunting and spearfishing because a lot of guys in our community do that, and it just gives me, I just start now. I just know it's a matter of time before these guys get saved because I'm around them so much, So I think I'm doing that, and we're trying to model that and try to get our church to feel like that's successful. I mean, there's a cool little line in Chariots of Fire. Everybody's probably seen the movie and probably heard this line before, but it's where Eric Little's sister, she's like, you got to come to China and be on the mission field. That's God's work, and he wants to run, and he says, God has made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure. And so that's kind of been one of the things as far as helping our church. I've used that a lot to try to help guys figure out what has God made you, and how can you do that in a way that makes you feel God's pleasure. How can you do it in a way where you acknowledge, man, God made me like this. And so we've got guys in our church who hunt or who surf or who dive or whatever. I mean, moms, whatever. I mean, we try to get everybody to think like that. Like, how can I see what God's made me, and how can I use it to glorify Him, to feel His pleasure in it. So, and I've done things like try to meet with the mayor or people like that and just say, hey, tell me about the city, tell me about whatever, just anything you can do to kind of understand your culture and your context. I mean, old school kind of missionary thought is you go in, you serve, and then you learn about the culture, you serve the community, you learn about the community, and then you earn the right to be heard. And I think sometimes we just roll in and sort of pitch up a building and say, all right, everybody, here we are, versus going in and trying to understand the culture and designing. I mean, if you look at Paul at Mars Hill, I mean, he's designing what he's going to say around what he's seen. He's watching, he's observing, he's learning, and then he gets the shot to preach, and it makes sense in the context. I think if we went back and looked at all those sermons in the New Testament, they all make sense in light of their context. If I got up and if my whole town gathered, and I read Acts 2, Peter's preach at Pentecost, the same results wouldn't happen, because that was a different context, and those Jews knew what Peter was talking about, and what he said made sense in light of their context. So I think it's just, I don't know, I think there's sometimes a lot of stuff we just miss.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks. That's helpful. I'll go down the line, guys, and just call on you. And if you have a question, you can unmute your mic and ask it. If not, you can pass. So no pressure. But so I thought we could start in Joplin at the granddaddy of them all, Tim Chambers. Do you have a question you want to ask Donnie?
sort of subgroups in the church that are doing a particularly good job of
Start
connecting.
over, Tim. Start over. Sorry, we missed the front part.
Okay. I was curious, like, if there are particular, I don't know, subgroups at the church there that are doing a particularly good job of reaching their, their subcultures.
Yeah, great question. I think that's a good point. Is that culture is never simple. It's it's messy. It's complicated. Subcultures and subcultures and subcultures. So we did a really good job with the surfing subculture to start with, and then that has bled into businessmen and single moms and a whole bunch of just various the most recent one is with the African American community in our area. Being in the South, it's still very common to do white church, black church, and we have just fought that thing from the beginning. Just tooth and nail on Sunday mornings. We just every time we've had a chance, we've said that's not what heaven looks like. It's not what heaven looks like. It's not what heaven looks like. And we're meant to be doing ministry on earth as it is in heaven. And in heaven, they're not divided up racially. And only until this year, when a black couple joined the church, and they heard me preach on that, they have gone and they are bringing every single black person they know to One Harbor, and not to simplify even that culture, because within that subculture, there's subcultures. But to kind of hit at that is, that's what I think success looks like, is when every, all ethnos, when Jesus says in the Great Commission, all peoples, preach the gospel to all peoples, make disciples of all peoples. The word's ethnos. It means people groups, subcultures. And so I think that's what, when we're doing, our job is to prepare the saints for the work of ministry. Well, the work of ministry is taking the gospel to peoples, to subcultures, to ethnos. So I think for me, that's what success looks like, not when guys are coming to Sunday morning, or not when they're just coming to community group, or not when they're tithing, or not when those things are great, but when they're living, as a missionary into their subculture, I think that's success, and not that we're anywhere close to that, but those other indicators are great. We celebrate, big generous giving, and we celebrate, all those same things, record attendance and all that stuff. We celebrate those things, but at the end of the day, you can have all the money, you can have all the attendance, and your city can never even know you exist. And we want to be a blessing, so we've got to get people to take the gospel where they live, and where they work, and where they do all their life. So.
Great. Let's go over to Pennsylvania. Steve, you guys got any questions there?
No, I appreciate, Donnie, your comments of just getting out among people, kind of getting out of the office. Looks like you got a lot of books in your office, so you've got a lot to keep you busy, but you're getting out among people. And I think for us here, we're not a church plant. We've been around 65 years, relatively new to Newfrontiers. So we're the culture within our church is changing as well. Like, we're in a cultural shift, even in among the church, which has been really good. I think it's going really well. We've had to say goodbye to some folks, but that's all right. We're saying hello to a lot of other ones.
Yeah, good.
For us, sometimes, when I first got into kayaking, I watch YouTube videos to teach myself how to do this. But you come up to the rapids, and I'd be thinking through all the checklist of everything. A lot of us, like a church, we haven't been used to. We kind of got into that insular kind of place where we don't. I don't think we could name 5 or 10 unsaved people that we had a constant relationship with. That, I think, has really shifted for us. But I think some of our thinking is, and to your point, is just not to overthink it, I think.
Yeah.
Not try to think through all the different subcultures, but just to actually meet people where they're at, to love them. Yeah. And to not go through this checklist like, okay, here's the rapids coming. Here's how I have to position my boat, my paddle. Here comes an unsaved person. Here's all. Work through my checklist, but just to actually be. So yeah. I love your stories of going out dunk hunting and just just meeting people kind of where they're at, not overthinking that.
Yeah.
I think I'm tracking with you. I really appreciate exactly where we're at in so many ways.
And what's the transition been like for you? I mean, having a church with such a history, what's it? I mean, so I kind of hit at two different things. I hit at the individual, sort of out there in the community with the people, and then I hit at, Paul's sort of, take on how we do ministry. We want to remove obstacles. I mean, I'm imagining that much history. I mean, just by default, you've picked up some. You've picked up some obstacles. How's it? I mean, is that something that's on the radar as far as removing those and
you have no idea
to the gospel?
Yeah, we're really working at that. I think it's unique.
Good.
It's a little bit more tempting for us to fall into those sentimental things. Nothing will stir up our church than doing as the deer. Man, that'll get people. I'll get them crying. We don't do that though.
Shoot the deer, man.
Yeah, but we've had those challenges. Shifting to become missional. Like the word missional wouldn't have even been really known. Among us. It's shocking to think that way, but God's really helped us come along.
Yeah, good for you. Well, if it's helpful, I would just say, sentiment is it's a powerful thing, and I think we can harness sentiment by helping us and our church get sentimental about the right things. Yeah. And so I try to get people to answer this question. I don't want to be part of a church where blank doesn't, and the answer shouldn't be where we don't sing as the deer. The answer should be, where people don't get saved or where, whatever. And so you start getting sentimental about. I mean, I'm very sentimental when I start talking about my wedding day because it really mattered, But so that's a good sentiment. When I look at my wedding pictures, I just think, oh my gosh, man, I got the best gift in the whole wide world. I'm the luckiest guy ever. That's helpful. That can be catalytic. And so I think people when lost people get saved, I mean people get baptized, stuff like that. I mean help the church say this is the stuff right here, this moment right here, ingrain this in your memory. This is what we're all about. This is what we get sentimental about. So whether you get all the buzzwords, mission and all the rest, this is what we do. This is if we don't do something, we say no to a lot of good things. We say no to a lot of great things because they're not gospel things. This is what we're all about. So that's great, man. Sounds like you're on an awesome journey.
That's cool, Donnie. I like that bit about using sentiment. Let's, Dusky, you guys got any questions in St. Joe for us?
Go for it. Sure. Hey, Trevor's going to ask you a question here.
From the glory cloud?
Yeah, what's that doing?
So the question is, how do you determine whether or not something is actually an obstacle to someone or whether or not you think it is an obstacle to someone?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, is there something in particular you're thinking about? Do you have like a hypothetical, something you're thinking about?
Not necessarily. You mentioned music earlier, the number of songs that you sing or things like that, length of your service or the way that you greet people as they come in the door or interact with people after service.
Yeah.
You organize small groups.
Yeah, I think here's the thing. I think we can't get lazy and go. You can do this. You could go do this all like right now. All over again. What I think happens is by the time we get it figured out and we go, oh yeah, we got it. By the time we've got it, we've usually lost it again. And so this whole process is something that's got to happen all the time. And so I just think if you build that culture, with your staff and your leadership and even your church, where you're constantly reevaluating. You're not falling in love with the wrong things. That at the end of the day, if you realize that something's an obstacle, it can go, because it's not Jesus, and only Jesus gets to be the obstacle. I think that's a helpful way to think. And then I think, just looking through everything that you are doing and just trying stuff. And I think if you're just intentional about this, you'll be doing a lot more than the average, sadly the average church is doing. We're in the process of buying and redoing a new building, and I mentioned us really trying hard to engage the black community in our town, the African American community in our town. Our new building is going to be basically on the street where some of the poorest people in our town live. A lot of those people happen to be African American, and we have pushed hard, for this whole building process. We wanted a building that when they walked in, whether they were poor or rich, white or black, that no matter who they were, they walked in, they could feel like, man, this could be my church. So it can't feel overtly nice or overtly white or overtly whatever. I mean, we're trying to try to take out any obstacles we can take out, so that it's a beeline straight towards the gospel, that nothing hangs them up before they hear Jesus is everything, and I don't know that we will. Well, I do know we won't get it all right, but I think that what I'm trying to get at is that intentionality, and then just willing, this is a terrible saying, but I've used it a lot. There's that old movie Old Yeller, and it's this dog who used to be great, and now he's rabid, and he's a danger, and I think it's just a process of just being willing to, somebody's got to take the dog out back and pull the trigger, and nobody wants to do that, but that's what we're tasked with doing. We're the ones who, we're removing obstacles. This thing becomes an obstacle, we take it out back and shoot it, So.
That's great. So we got shoot the deer, we got shoot Old Yeller, we got grow beard. We're moving along. We'll
matching all the stereotypes.
Yeah. We got about 20 minutes left. Get a few more questions in. Hopefully, we'll go to Graham in Austin, and then Visalia after that. So, Graham, fire away.
Yeah, it's really excellent, Donnie. Thank you very much. And I wondered whether you could speak into your community group life. You're obviously living it as a church, being very Jesus out in the community, getting to know people, connecting with them. How are you helping your community groups to engage in that process? What do they look like? Is that one of the connection points for your people that you're meeting out in the city? And how are you helping to equip your community groups?
Yeah, good question. So if I don't answer this the way that you need it answered, I'll put you in touch with a guy at our church who does do it, and you can have anything that we do that would help you, you can have. We currently, I think, have about 40 community groups, and we're pushing hard to double that next year. What I'm trying to say is they're incredibly important to us, and we do see them as the main avenue, for discipleship, and we want to harness that for mission. Disciples don't just get the gospel, they don't just gather around the gospel, they don't just grow up in the gospel. Those are three things that typically happen in community groups. You're explaining something of the gospel, you're gathering together, and praying for each other, and you're discipling each other, you're spurring each other on, right? You're doing those things, but Jesus said that disciples also go out with the gospel. And when we make community groups about getting together, about learning something, and about growing up, we take away one of the most fundamental parts of discipleship, which is mission. And so we won't just let guys get together and sort of have their little Bible studies without some sort of mission being there. And so we're constantly putting opportunities up, out to the church as far as, hey, we've got a chance on this Saturday to go help this thing or do that, and try to get community groups to sign up together. We found that the more groups that you can team up together. I mean, if a guy named Mike Breen, I didn't come up with this, but Mike Breen was saying how he he'd tell one community group, you're gonna go, you take this widow's yard, it's overgrown, and let's all go over there and help out. And you got 22 people in the group, and 2 people show up, and they spend the whole day weed whacking and everything, and they hate the idea of mission going forward. But if you get 3 or 4 groups to own that one project together, then you get 20 people total out of potentially 60. But they have a great time. They really get a lot accomplished, and so kind of long story short, we've started doing that. We started encouraging community groups once a quarter to do mission, and we get them kind of to hang out in their regions together and come up with something to do. So one of the guys picked one of the groups or the regions picked a high school that had a whole bunch of just terrible kid committed suicide and a whole bunch of just terrible stuff. And they realized that the staff were really hurting, and there was no one had done anything to help the staff. So these community groups got together and just it just went and brought the whole staff, served the whole staff the high school lunch, and they said just person after person was just crying coming through the line, just like they couldn't believe, who would do this? Why would you do this? And so I think getting them to kind of own it, rather than it being headquarters just telling them what to do, getting them to think on the ground what makes sense for our region, and then celebrating the heck out of it when it does happen.
That's great. That's good stuff. All right, Radiant Church, you guys got anything?
Yeah, just real quick. I think my question was, what's the balance? I guess you're talking about how you grew the beard out, started to go hunting and stuff, and obviously there was things that you enjoyed like prior to that. We've got like these little like subcultures, it feels like, within our church context, and I think that they live like authentically within themselves. And enjoy the things that they enjoy. And I guess my question is like, what's the balance between like enjoying those things, doing the Eric Liddell, like, I feel God's pleasure in this kind of like deal, but also I guess stretching ourselves into maybe reaching different cultures. Do you have any tips or thoughts on some of that?
Totally, man. Well, I mean, maturity definitely doesn't look like a clique, and so I think the starting place is to get guys on mission, doing mission, into the subculture that makes the most sense to them. That would be a really big win for most churches, to start there. But I think then you've got we've got a ton of awesome examples, in the New Testament where guys were, Jesus and the disciples and the apostles and the early church were always in situations where they were doing ministry way outside of their context. And so I think maturity looks like that. It doesn't look like, we're only doing ministry to our people. It's, it's being willing. So the first step, I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel like for my journey, my first step has been trying to help people see their own life and world as mission, and begin to be intentional when they go, do their kind of thing, that they do it with the intentionality of, man, I want to see Jesus get glory through this. I'm hoping, I'm praying for, the conversations and the opportunities to talk about the gospel, and then you begin to just, and then building on that, them seeing their whole life and the desire to push past their own culture, and so I didn't grow up hunting. That was my example. I didn't grow up hunting. I didn't own camouflage. I didn't have a big beard. I didn't have all that stuff. This was me going, man, I don't know anything about this. The learning curve is massive. I mean, sitting with my wife and us having to constantly have conversations about, and so for the longest time I just borrowed, gear and borrowed guns and still do that stuff because we're not going to go get in debt so I can be on mission, and live out a hunting fantasy. But it's me going, there's a group of people that won't surf and won't drink coffee, but they need the gospel. And so seeing a bunch of those guys get saved just got me excited for that subculture, and I'm reluctantly feeling myself dragged into the golfing crowd now because there's a group of guys who, strangely enough, I feel like there's an opportunity for me to make much of Jesus with them, but it means I have to play golf, and I hate golf. And I won't buy any plaid pants or anything like that. I won't sell out, but I guess I don't know if I'm answering your question, but what I'm trying to say is I'm not saying that success is they just live in a clique. It gets back to what does heaven look like,
Yeah, that's good. That's a real good question. Helpful. Maybe next year when we have you, you'll be wearing plaid and clean shaven with a golf visor. That'd be epic. Idaho, Dave, you got any questions? And then maybe we'll go to Bo after that.
All right, I'm muting myself there. Sorry. I was just curious about there's kind of a paradox where you talk about our church services where we gather people, but then also in the same context, you talked about meeting the guy in the coffee shop and how meeting the guy in the coffee shop, it took going into his environment,
right,
for him to open up. How do we balance that out? The paradox of like we're inviting people to our church service. Why do we expect people to? I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question. I know I expect people to come to church and get saved. They're going to hear the gospel. But how do we equip our people to share the gospel with people so that they're the ones leading their friends to Christ? They're the ones in those environments instead of expecting that an environment where people will come to church where that's not an environment they're comfortable at. That's not typically their cup of tea, so to speak. Why do we expect so much results there when, like, we go out and we would be contextualize the gospel in people's worlds that they're living in? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
It's like do you go to a pancake house? Do you go to Starbucks? Do you go hunting? What do you do? I've got a beard. I could get a gun. I could kill something. I've killed something before.
Yeah. Okay, Dave. I think a couple of things. I think we get to expect that people are going to come to church and hear the gospel and get saved because it's one of the means by which we see in Scripture it happen. There's just lots of examples of, a ton of people gathered and they heard, one sermon from one guy and the Spirit came and opened their eyes and they repented and turned to Jesus. So I think we just embrace that, but I think we've got to build away from seeing that as the only avenue, and so you just have to talk about it a lot, and you have to just be willing to give yourself to seeing it change forever. We had a lady who brought an unsaved friend to church, and she was walking in the lobby and saw me, this lady who's in our church, and she leaned over to me. She said, "This lady's not saved. Really go after it today." I was like, "Oh my gosh, okay, I'm pretty sure that woman just heard you." Anyway, during the sermon, in the middle of the sermon, while I'm preaching, this lady is sitting next to her friend who's unsaved, and she's literally doing this, like while I'm preaching, like kind of doing this whole thing, which is absolutely unbelievably awkward. But her whole expectation was that now this woman's going to get saved because she made it to church, And I think that's the thing we've got to build away from. And it just takes time for your people to know it's their job, for them to have faith for it to happen in their world. And you got to celebrate it big time. I mean, the only time we celebrate people getting saved shouldn't be when it happens through our ministry. It can be, when it happens through all kinds of other ministries in the church. It just is. I mean, I just think it's something that it seems like it's a cultural thing that's going to take time to break, But you got to determine that you want to see it change and give yourself to it, And even think about, hey, what can I do next year to chip away at some of that,
Right. How much?
So it's both and I guess is what I'm saying.
So following up on that, and how much do we actually try to change?
Over in Tacoma for us?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Donnie. I really do. Just wondering real quick then on like a 2-minute deal on how have you guys faced the challenge of growing pretty rapidly and training and equipping leaders to lead those community groups?
Yeah. We didn't react really well at first, and so we had to kind of go play cleanup a little bit. And so now, like I said, if that's something we can give you our stuff on, I'll put you in touch with our guy. Just email us and we'll do it. But we've got a training that we do now for community group leaders that like rapidly brings guys through whole process for that. What success looks like, and really just get them set up. And so we're churning out. And the biggest thing we did, we went from saying that there was no cap on how many people could be at a community group to saying that no more than 14 people, and so 14 adults. And once we did that, we went from like 10 groups to like 25, almost in a couple of months, and then from there to 40. And once they couldn't be many churches that basically spent the entire time just trying to go through the line of getting lasagna, once they were like they had to multiply, it blew up like crazy. And then as far as the other leadership stuff goes, I just wrote a curriculum that I now have a men's version and a women's version. A curriculum. The men's one is 12 months long, and it's like an eldership development program that we're doing. And then the ladies one is 6 months long, and that one is just because I got really convicted that I was spending a lot of time developing the men, but I wasn't spending any time developing the women, and I was wondering why our women's ministry sucked. And so I've got you guys can have any of that you want, but I've got a curriculum I go through where we're trying to raise up elders, and we've started seeing guys come through, and in that thing we're working out sort of philosophy of ministry idolatry, making sure they understand what we understand about the gospel, and helping sort of identify whether it's a good fit for us and them, So thanks, man.
All right, Andy, in Chicago, if you got a question, go for it. If not, it looks like your boss tweeted something in, so we could ask that.
Well, that tweet is going to supersede anything that I would have, so why don't you just go with that?
All right, so it looks like Matt tuning in from Chicago via Twitter. He's wanting to know what things you've done in public worship to remove those barriers to the gospel.
Cool.
So it sounds like we're shooting the deer.
Yeah. So, guys, please don't let this sound prescriptive. This is descriptive. I'm describing to you what we've done. I'm not telling you what to do. You're the highest authority in your churches. You get to, make those calls. You're just asking a question. I'll give you the answer. We have made sure that one of the things we did was just had all of our musicians filter all the songs we do to make sure that what we are singing does make sense in light of the gospel. We're not singing just because it's got a good beat or everybody loves it, but it actually. And there's been times where there's like one line or one kind of phrase that's off. The guys have to rewrite it, and we just hope those bands don't find out. One of the most intentional things we're doing now is at the beginning of the service before we sing, we're saying something like this at the beginning. We're saying, hey, welcome everybody. We get the worship leader to say this. We recognize that not everybody in this room, would be a Christian, and we're so glad you're here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing to Jesus for a little bit because we really love him and he's changed our whole lives. But we don't want you to feel the pressure to sing because if you don't even know Jesus, we could see that'd be weird. So don't feel the pressure to sing and raise your hands and all that. You know what? If you want to stand or sit or whatever you're most comfortable with, we'll have the words up on the screen and you're going to learn a lot about who Jesus is, just by reading those words. But anyway, we're glad you're here, and in just a minute we'll get to the sermon. So we just try to demystify this. What I don't want to, I think as pastors we know that one of the most dangerous things is people sort of assuming Christianity, and just sort of basically they just start kind of mimicking Christians rather than actually responding to Jesus. And so we're trying to encourage people not to just start singing songs to Jesus and raising their hands to Jesus when they don't even know Jesus. That's really dangerous. In my point of view, that's dangerous. We should sing and raise our hands and give and all that because Jesus has grabbed our hearts and we can't help ourselves. And so we're trying to demystify some of that and just help them. And then if there's any kind of scripture or a word or something like that comes forward, we're going to go way out of our way to explain this is what it is. We're not just going to assume that everyone gets it. We keep the sermon time shorter. We throughout the sermon, I'm referencing, if you're here and you're not a Christian, what I just said I'm sure was offensive or a little confusing or whatever. I'm doing that stuff all throughout the message, and at the end we make ourselves available. We say, look, if you're here and you're not a Christian, and some of the stuff we said was confusing or offensive or made you angry or whatever, man, just grab us afterwards. We'd love to talk about it. So I think it's just acknowledging that they're there, making them feel welcome, and trying to explain away and demystify things that you can. So, anyway.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Donnie. It's about 2 o'clock, so we'll honor your time and call it there. That was real helpful. I'm sure we could keep talking about that for a while. Just really appreciate all you guys making time to be a part and people that are watching via the live feed. This is great stuff. We'll do it the first Tuesday of every month. Just want to encourage you guys to take this stuff and chew on it with your team and try to apply it to where you're at. And we just really appreciate you, Donnie. Thanks for stirring this stuff up in us. And I don't know how we can all say thank you. Because we're all, oh, there we go. Graham's doing a silent golf clap.
No,
Good.
Man, thank you guys. It's a privilege, man. Yeah, absolutely privilege. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks, Donnie.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Have a good day. Appreciate good hanging out with you guys.
Later.
Thanks, Mike.